All right, Danny, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you doing this, by the way. Little backstory. I heard from you from my partner. She told me a little bit about you. And I was like, man, what an amazing story for what I've heard.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit, and whatever you feel comfortable with, share with whoever's out there, right? There's another Danny out there that knows nothing or where Danny once was. So can you give us just like a really quick, how did you get here today? What did your life look like, so we can have some context as some of the things I want to touch on?
Okay, yeah, that works. So, I'm Danny. 34 years old currently. Previously, I've lived in Vegas actually most of my life. I've been here since I was like 5. Grew up, did well in school, graduated, and then was going to go to college, decided I didn't want to at the time. I graduated in 2008, and that was the time of obviously all the crazy economy stuff. So then after that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go in the military. My dad is prior Navy. He's passed away now, but he's a former Navy SEAL. So I kind of got some of that sense of wanting, patriotism, I guess, from that, and sense of purpose. And so I went to see what I could sign up for the Navy, scored well on my ASVAB, which is the test that you have to, it's like an aptitude test to get in. And then I ended up scoring really high. And then they were like, hey, we have a program for you called the Navy Nuclear Propulsion Program. So I'd never heard of it before, but we have like nuclear carriers, and all of our nuclear subs is like what they're powered on is nuclear reactors. So obviously it's like a pretty intensive program academically. And I don't know if I'm like speaking into the mic or breathing into the mic, but we'll see. Anyways,
You're good.
So I went into that program, and then during that time, like I did well academically, but during my time in the Navy, there was a very big shift in my mental towards the negative. I always did well in my job, but I've always been like a huskier kid. Even since I was like little, I've always been bigger. And so like before I even went in the Navy, I had to lose, I think like 60 pounds before I could even enlist, because I was like out of their weight requirements. So I went in, I didn't lose weight healthy. I like basically was like starving myself, just eating like tuna, chicken, and water, and doing like a bunch of cardio.
So it was more like a commitment to get there, not...
Yeah.
It
wasn't really sustainable, but I made it happen. I lost that weight in like less than 3 months, I think, which was awful, but I did it, and I got in, and then I had to wait. Like when you first enlist, you sign up, and then you're in like a waiting program until you actually go to boot camp. So I was like waiting for like 10 months. So gained a little bit of weight back, but nothing crazy. I was kind of maintaining. And then I went in. This was at the end of 2009 now. November of 2009 is when I went in. So went in, you go through boot camp. That was interesting, but I did well. I was actually like they have something called RPOC, which is the Recruit Chief Petty Officer of your entire division. There's like 80 something recruits that you're with. So I was like the leader of my whole group. So march them around, do all the commands and orders and stuff. And then also like take the flak for everybody that's, am I allowed to curse?
Yeah,
all right. Okay. So for the people that are fucking up and stuff. So I was the guy like, hey, you're the problem, fix it. So that was a cool experience though. So graduated from boot camp. I go to the nuke school, which is the program itself is like 1.5 years long entirely, or from beginning to end. And it's in like 3 different phases. So go through that. And then I guess like during the second phase of schooling, which is the most academically rigorous, was probably like the most stressed that I was at the time, but I was still doing well. Like I'm always a person like, and I'm still like this to this day. It's kind of like a character flaw of mine, but it works in my favor. I am like my own worst enemy. So I just sit there and I think that
So you're self-critical, is what you're saying.
Highly self-critical. Like in everything that I do, I'm like, man, that wasn't enough, or you suck, or whatever. And I've always been that way. And when I say it works to my favor, it's often because I feel that I perform well under pressure, but I know that retrospectively. So like when something's leading up that's going to take a lot of attention or focus for me, I'm like super in my head about it. And I'm just like, man, like you're not going to do well. And then I do well, or I do it. And then I'm like, man, I hope it went well. And everybody's like, you were great or whatnot, even with the DJing stuff, and we'll get to that later. But, so I would sit there and be like, oh, I failed that test. And then like next thing I know, I get like a 95 on the test. I'm just like, okay, cool. So I make it through the program. But during that time I feel like the real beginning of the decline of my mental health. just because, for one, being taken out of everything you've ever known. Like I'm literally across the country. I was stationed in South Carolina at the time for my training, and not only just being away from your friends and family, but
and
humidity.
For being Vegas boys, that humidity is that's the number one.
Terrible. That's what I mean. Like I didn't even know that there were gnats that bit you. Like our gnats out here don't do that. But there's like deranged gnats in the middle of South Carolina that just want to eat you alive. And it's like, all right, cool. So, but yeah, you're uproot your entire life, and they take an 18 or 19-year-old kid fresh out of high school and put you in a program to teach you 4+ years worth of nuclear power theory and operations in a year and a half. And it's just like, it's a lot. So I don't remember the exact numbers of what the attrition rate is, but it's pretty significant. There's a lot of people that don't make it through for grades or for mental reasons. I had people that I went to boot camp with and went through the program with that committed suicide during the program. Like, it's not the greatest place to be.
It's almost like it's mentally rigorous and taxing, I'm assuming, from an academic point of view. And second is knowing what the job is and like what you have to do. And I think it, really managing the idea of, if something really goes sideways, you are the Bhagavad Gita. I think that's like you're the bringer of death. So I can imagine how that gets, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like at the time, I feel like I didn't even really think about that until I actually got like stationed on my ship. Through the whole like nuclear training pipeline, it was just like, get through this and don't like pass up the opportunity. Because I knew that a lot of times, or at least what had been told to me, is that typically like they call us Navy nukes. That's like the title, or that's like the slang title for us. And there's a pretty small community within the military. Like I think I read some articles like within the last 5 years about like the different most rigorous programs. And obviously like Navy SEALs and that sort of thing is like one, but that's physical, but then also very mental, just from a mental, like not wanting to quit perspective. But this one is like the most academically rigorous program in any military branch, which is why the attrition rate is so high. And, some people just aren't good test takers. They may be great operators, but they suck in a testing forum. But then when you put them in a position where they actually have to respond to an emergency, they're great. But they still have to prove that they understand the theory of what their physical input in the power plant is doing to the bigger picture. And if they don't understand that or have that, if they don't have that understanding, then it's not easy to connect the dots, I guess.
It also has to come with stress. I mean, you're working on a critical or a mission critical thing.
Yeah.
And then if it's bad, it's showtime. It's kind of what the boxers say. It's like everybody's a good boxer until you have the big show lights on you and you're like, oh.
Yeah, it's true. So you go through the 3 different phases. And like I said, the first 2 is just academic. And then the third phase so the second phase was power school, nuclear power school. And then the last one's called prototype. And that's where they put you on. It's a real operating reactor. So for us, they put us on decommissioned subs that were like basically docked on a river in South Carolina. And the propeller spins, but instead of a propeller, it's a water brake. So everything's operating like as if the sub was moving, but it's just staying in place. So the reactor is actually operating. You're doing everything, but you're as like an under instruction of a qualified individual while you're going through the program. So that's another 6 months after you finish the first 2 parts. So I did really well in that part because that's a lot of just applying the theory and operation stuff. I never really had any issues there. It is stressful because you're on like a rotating shift work schedule at that time. So that was like the first time I've ever really had to work like a real off shift. Like I've worked swings before, like before I was in the Navy and stuff, I worked like a second job, but it was only for like 4 hours after a regular shift. It wasn't like hey, you're starting at midnight and operating until 8 or 10 in the morning and then getting off. And then, when they switch your schedule, sometimes like when you're going, I don't remember what the rotation was, but it was going from like swings to mids or vice versa. It would be like, you'd have like a day and a half off, including your time. So you get off your schedule, go home, sleep, try to reset your body clock, and then get up. And then the next day you're going back to work.
It's kind of like firemen and other people like that. Yeah. Emergency workers. Yeah.
So that's like the beginning of like, I think also what really led to like some of my decline of mental health was first just going through the stresses of the program, then having my like sleeping rhythm and circadian rhythm thrown off, which was also not good for my metabolism. And I already have, like I said, I've always kind of been predispositioned to be a bigger guy. And so I was gaining weight throughout the second 2 phases of school. Through power school and prototype, I was gaining weight and I was struggling to.
So for context on that, right?
Yeah.
You are now an officer? You're
No. So when I went in, I was enlisted. So the rank that you go in initially is an E3 or pay grade, but I was technically, because of my position, I was called a fireman. And then once I promoted after the first phase of school, I became a petty officer 3rd class.
So, and sorry, just because I'm not great with military stuff. So essentially there was no like basic training happening. It was all, this is your job. You're being trained to perform your job. Was there still like a physical component to that?
Yeah. So the very first part that you go through before you even go to your like assigned job school is the basic training part. The part earlier where I talked about, I was like the recruit chief petty officer of my whole division. That's like a 2.5 month thing, something like that. And that's where all the physical, they like teach you all the military fundamentals. That's where all like all the videos you see of like people getting screamed at, that's boot camp, right? So we went through that first. And then after that is when the nuclear power stuff starts. So when you're in nuclear power school, like you still have to go through and do like group physical training and stuff. But if you're not taking care of your body, it doesn't really matter. You can go and you can run a mile every day. Yeah. Exactly. So that's kind of what started to happen is I started to, because I didn't have my support system that I usually had at home. Like I had another friend that enlisted with me, but we were in different classes. So like we hung out on the weekends and stuff, but I didn't see him regularly. And I'll elaborate more on that because me and him are still like one of my best friends to this day. But like we went through a period where, because I didn't feel safe to talk to him about my mental health declining, I stopped confiding in him, and I like didn't have someone to open up to at the time because I felt weak. Yeah, so we'll get into that.
Can we pause there? Because I think that's a really good point, and really just so that you're aware and everybody else listening is aware is, to me, I believe I'm a student of human behavior, right? Yeah. And why? It's ultimately because I am simply trying to understand myself better. Mm-hmm. So none of this is like, do I know anything better than you? I don't think anybody does. And even if I did, it wouldn't apply to you because you're your own individual, right? True. So I love exploring the mentality of those things and why. Yeah. So when you said you felt alone and you felt that you couldn't open up, what do you think was driving that?
So we had some conversations in the past about like other individuals that were having problems. Like even before we went in the Navy, I kind of like at the time. So this was like, late 2000s, because I've known him since we were 12. So like we met each other in 6th grade, and we had like a small falling out in 7th grade. But other than that, like we've literally been part of each other's lives since 6th grade. In high school, we were part of each other's class for like each year for, I think like 7 out of 8 periods each year. We had the same classes, same schedule. Like we had our same first job together. We both enlisted together. Like he was my best man at my wedding. Like crazy. Like we did everything. But it was also funny because we also had like a little bit of a competitive vibe with each other too. Like we always rooted for each other, but there was also that competition, and he was like great academically. I was great academically, but he was like very fit and I wasn't. And I wasn't jealous of him for that, but I always felt like I wasn't enough because like he would get attention from girls and stuff. And like I always had girlfriends and stuff, so I can't really say that I didn't have that, but I guess I didn't feel.
No, but it's the difference. Like, there's Brad Pitt next to you, and then there's like, I just look cute. Yeah, totally get it. As a male, and for females listening, if any of them are, you have to understand. Nobody comes to a male and says, "Hey, man, you look great today," and walks off. Yeah. Nobody does that. So, as a male, you understand that there's kind of like a hierarchy of this.
Yeah, there's levels to this shit, right? Yeah. And it's difficult because like he still is a great looking dude, but he's always had a physique that I would have to work insanely hard to maintain or to attain, and he didn't have to put in as much work. And that's nothing wrong. Like he can't help that. He didn't ask for his body. It's what he got, and good for him. Like he's got good genes, right? But I didn't have that same, I guess, baseline, but I also was extremely negligent as time went on. So I don't blame my genes for what got me to my worst point, but I do blame my genes for the amount of work that is required to maintain that sort of a body, I guess.
So can I take a moment to acknowledge you for that? This is huge, right? And ultimately why most men don't acknowledge other men. They just don't. It's for whatever reason, it's frowned upon, right? So let me acknowledge you for that, first of all, because that's massive. Most of us do want to be a victim of a situation. Yeah. And that's huge for you to say, you know what? If taking a step back, maybe that's not how you always felt, but that's how you feel today. Right. And you're like, hey, you know what? today I acknowledge that it's not my genes. There's other factors to that, and it could be simpler for some people, but I get it. It's my life, or my cards are, I have to give it a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're absolutely right. That's the way I feel today. I don't think that that's how I always felt. And not that I ever like intentionally held it against him, but there always was like a
You could feel it. You could always feel that little bit of rub.
Yeah,
on certain things, yeah.
right. And it was like we rooted for each other and we were there for each other and stuff. But like as going back to the mental health thing, like as time went on, we saw other people that were like struggling with mental health at the time, and in like the mid to late 2000s, it was still kind of like taboo to not be okay, especially as a man, right? And it still is to this day a little bit, because society has predisposed men to be like, you know, our fathers and grandfathers taught us that like, hey, you have to be this like strong individual for your family or for whatever, right? And you have to like maintain this like weight of the world on your shoulders because other people can't, right? And to an extent, I still think that that's like, it's important for men to be strong. But for me personally, that's something I've learned, is that I can be strong by being vulnerable and letting other people know that it's okay to not feel okay. Because as long as we continue to like suppress those feelings, you'll never actually process those feelings and be able to let go of those things, like those traumas.
So now, for you, think about this for a second. You are king of the world for the moment. How would you describe strength to somebody that doesn't understand what strength is? Or what is Danny's definition of strength?
Okay. So my definition of strength, this is just like off the cuff, but would be being your most authentic self and being able to acknowledge all of your strengths, but also all of your flaws, and understanding that there's always a level of continuous improvement that's required, and having that real understanding of like, I will never achieve perfection. I will never achieve maybe every single thing that I want to do, but ultimately that I am like I'm ultimately responsible for what happens in my life. Like there's obviously a certain level of luck with all these things that come in, but being able to take ultimate responsibility and understand that you are the true writer of your own story if you take that power into your own hands and utilize it.
So you would, the way that I would describe that, right, is ultimately is when you're willing to release or give up, allowing yourself to be a victim of your circumstance.
Yeah. Like it's a lot of it comes back to the accountability of our own downfalls that lead to those lulls in our life. Like I didn't, like, we'll get to this later on, obviously, but I didn't get to 450 plus pounds at one point because of bad luck and because life just sucked for me. Like I added to that. I was negligent. I allowed myself to become a victim in every sense of the word. And that lack of responsibility to myself is what led me there. But I was also thankfully eventually able to have that epiphany to lead myself out of it.
So let's go deeper into that, because that's where I had the interest in just amazement, you know, that you had gotten yourself in this situation. And I want you to be able to explain a little bit more how that looked like it got there, and where the mentality was essentially the thing that I think was more than likely the carrot that kind of led you there, so that we can come back and say, okay, what was the growth? Because losing weight is a discipline that you have to have or create within yourself, not have like it's innate, but you build it within yourself so that you can achieve a goal that's far out there. Right. Yeah. So I'm going to backtrack just slightly on this. So we're going back to initially what led me to not feeling safe talking to my friend, right? Because that's kind of, I feel like that's pivotal to understanding on how I continued to just suppress these feelings and not actually try to do something about it. So we had some conversations, and I'm not going to get into the specific individuals or whatnot, but we saw other people and his thing, or like people that may have killed themselves or whatever. And we would talk about it, and he'd be like, oh, you know, they're just fucking weak. Like, whatever. Like, I don't feel sorry for them. Like that's a reflection of his own mindset at the time.
Correct. Right. And so I was like, man, like that sucks, because I've always been like more of an empath. Like I've always been a more emotional individual. I still am to this day. Like I'm a very emotional person, but now I'm emotional with direction. Whereas before I was just kind of like this, like felt lost. Right. And just because I've always cared about people, but as time went on and I began to lose myself, I started to act in a manner that like didn't really align with that, which sucked because like there's a lot of instances where I wish I could go back and correct the way I communicated with someone. But I now know that at the time I was like doing the best that I could with the tools that I had. And now I'm in a better place to process emotions and to respond from a place of trying to actually understand and come up with a sensible response rather than just trying to respond, like immediately respond. Like now I actually try to be thoughtful of my words and the weight of those words. And so, and I've righted some of those things with certain people. Like even a few months ago, I messaged a girl that I used to serve with, and I guess something I put on Facebook a few years ago struck her a wrong way. So we started talking about it. And at the time I was truly trying to understand like what the issue was, but she wasn't open to talking to me about it. And as time went on, I kind of like started to, even if I didn't agree with her, like try to see it from her perspective, why it could be perceived as hurtful or whatever, or hateful or whatnot. And it always bothered me that because she ended up seeing like, that's the thing is this is just how you feel and this is what you believe. So I'm not going to try to like talk to you about it more. And she just ended up like removing me and blocking me. And I was like, man, like that, it always bothered me because I was like, I don't want someone's last image of me to be someone who I don't believe that I am. And I know that I can't control that for everyone, but that really bothered me. And as I've grown the last few years, I kind of took that to heart. And so I ended up like messaging her.
But wait, hold on.
Yeah, sorry.
No, this is great.
Yeah.
Think about this for a second. What bothered you about that specifically?
The fact that someone felt that I was someone that I'm not. Like the fact that someone viewed me in a manner that is not who I believe Danny is.
So now I'm of this affliction as well, but we're going to go there because this is great. Something that I've learned this year, and it has hit me pretty hard. I've lost some friends, and I value relationships. I do. To me, that's currency, right?
Yeah.
And we're how do I want to say this? Relationships are an investment for me. They really are. That's something important to me. This is why I'm giving you time. This is why I give my time to you. I want it to be a mutual consideration. If people don't know how to grow in a relationship, and for anybody that's had a long-term partner, or you're going to relate right now, and you're going to say, yeah, I want a person to grow with me. Yep. But growth requires those learning moments that you were just talking about. Without them, I have to have the safe space to make a mistake, to learn. And if we don't give that to each other, hopefully this is going to like all tie in, right? If we don't give that to each other, then where was your investment as a relationship to understand? Because I heard your investment. I wanted to listen. I wanted to hear her out. But do you feel like you were getting the same investment from her?
Probably not, but it's also because we just weren't like super close, which we served together.
But hold on. What does closeness have to do with that personal? It's important to me. So follow what I'm saying. Yeah. It's important to me to have a relationship with you. Yeah. My investment is mine to make, but you're important. Only because I said so. Yeah. It's me. It's a me thing. So that's why I want you to explore that a little bit more from her perspective.
I feel like now when you put it in those terms is like I had more investment in the perception of that relationship more than she did, which is fine. Like that's her prerogative, and I don't blame her for that at all necessarily. But like you said, it kind of comes back to me wanting people to perceive me as the person who I believe that I am, right? And I also don't think that there's like necessarily anything wrong with that, but becoming too invested in that space is kind of like where we can fall prey to that.
And that's why I bring it up, because that is the thing that's waiting to take us back into the darkness when somebody will not validate us.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. Yep. You're absolutely right. Because we talked about that even a little bit right before the podcast. So yeah, that's true.
So I share that and I open up about that because it's been a struggle for me, Danny. And it's great that it worked out with you as well, that it's just year, right? Yeah, this year where some of this stuff has just fallen apart from my side. And I don't know if I would say I'm empathic. I don't think I am, but I'm pretty clear. And I'm a person that believes that truth is the ultimate currency. Whether you see the value in it or not is irrelevant to me.
That's true.
I say it's worth something, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of have to stand for that is the truth. This is important. This is valuable. So as I exchange that with my friends, if they don't see the value in it, I was like, but how could you not? This is the thing for me. Like, I'm pouring my heart out to you and you're not responding. What do I have to do? What do I have to do to make you see that? And a big learning was you can't. Yeah. And the further you go down that hole, the more you're holding yourself back from your breakthrough of whatever that might be. Right?
Yeah, that's very true.
So I am sharing this with you now so that you can see that as you're going to share more, these are going to be echoes of that. And I hope that you see it as it comes around.
Yeah. I'm already kind of seeing it now, just like thinking about it retrospectively. But yeah, it's just like who I've always been a little bit. And that like I said, I don't necessarily fault myself for it or think it's a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing for certain situations, right?
And one of the things that you can say is, because I'm a big believer that right and wrong is a question of morality, right? And I say that to a lot of people. And I say, let's not look at what's right and wrong. Let's just look at why you do something, and then you get to decide whether you want to do that or not. Example, I punch you in the face. I have to look at that, and I have to say, man, I just punched Danny in the face. Why did I do that?
Right.
No, right, wrong.
Yeah.
I don't have to validate myself. I don't have to have a moral standing of like Danny said something about somebody that I disagreed with, and now I just imparted justice. No, you have to look at it and say, I, taking ownership, punched another human being in the face. Why?
Yeah.
And if that reason I can live with, more power to you. Like, that's it. That was for you. That made sense. But when you look at things in that nature, it really dissolves a lot of the items that we kind of fall to or we go back to.
Yeah.
Well, I was right. Danny looked at that person weird. How dare he?
Right.
Danny can't be a person?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very true. It's all based on like everyone's like personal perspective, right? And everyone's, like you said, going back to morality and what your values are will dictate what your natural response may be. And a lot of this goes back to people not being able to rationalize their emotions in a healthy way. And then we get into this like immediate response thing, which I will use that to segue into something here in a second, which led to more of my decline, which was stuff with my mom at the time. So yeah, I didn't feel safe talking to my friend about all this stuff at the time. And I was getting heavier, and then I was having more problems in the Navy at the time trying to maintain my weight and stuff. Like I could do all the physical stuff. So just like for everyone else's knowledge. So the physical fitness requirements in the military, you have to like maintain a certain, depending on your height, a certain weight. And if you can't meet the weight, you have to meet a certain body fat. And they do the body fat measurements by measuring the circumference of your neck and measuring the circumference of your waist and then putting it into some little bullshit formula and then saying like, okay, you're too fat or you're not. Right. And so then on top of that, you have it was like a 1.5 mile run and then like a push-ups and sit-ups minimum. I could like max the sit-ups, almost max the sit-ups every time, even at like one of my biggest weights later on. Push-ups, I would always do like middle of the ground. Like I wasn't just meeting minimum, but I wasn't like maxing it out. And then like I struggled with the run, but I still did it. Like I was able to pass. Right. But I was always struggling with, even at my greatest physique ever, which was like just after boot camp. For my height, I was always overweight because I'm like 5'8", so they wanted me to be like 175 or below. And I'm like, I graduated boot camp and I looked like skin and bones, and I was like 184, and so I was still overweight, but I was meeting the body fat requirements based on a little bullshit calculate. Yeah, I was like, okay, whatever. But as time went on, like I got bigger, but I was still like strong and I was like physically well, for my body type. But so I was struggling to meet that. And then it got difficult. So I was meeting it, but just enough to kind of get by. And then, so.
Can you pause there for a second?
Yeah.
Do you think that that's something more innate within you? Because there is you doing something do you feel like that echoes anywhere in your life, that you would always push it to just do well enough?
Are you asking if I feel that I was just trying to like meet the bare minimum or what?
I don't think that you try to do that. I think that it almost becomes your self default setting where you don't think about it and you notice these behaviors that are silent only when you look back. And that's what I'm asking. Like, do you see that happen anywhere else in your life at that time?
Not at that stage. I think later on, yes. At that stage, I think I really was trying to like do my best, and I was just struggling to like actually lose weight. And then after time went on, like, so I was meeting it, but I was like kind of barely squeaking by. And I was like, yeah, this sucks. So I would like go, and I was still working out and stuff, but I was still like not being able to shed the weight, or I was still gaining. And then it became a dietary thing at one point. So where it was like, it didn't matter how much, working out I was doing, the dietary thing was a problem. And that's where it shifted to that like entirely later on, to where it was like, oh, I'm working out, but it doesn't matter if I'm going and eating fucking like 2 McDoubles and a large fry, like that doesn't mean shit. But I ended up turning to food as a crutch because it gave me this like dopamine hit of like, okay, I feel okay. Like food has always been a comfort for me.
Well, you and me both. And that's where I resonated so much when I heard about your story, because I'm like, I am Danny in that perspective. You and I share that same comfort.
Yeah.
Food, that's what it was for me.
Yeah.
Or it is, like, not was, it is. And it's my constant struggle with that toxic relationship with food.
Right. And so I know like there's probably a lot of people that like maybe are in the military and they're just like, oh, you're just like one of those other fat kids. And that's fine. Like if you've never been in my shoes, if you've never had to walk a day in my shoes, you will never know what it's like. And I don't really care if you understand that or not. But I know what my reality was and is still to this day. And I'll never let anyone take that away from me. I feel like before I was always in this victim mindset of like, okay, this is happening because life sucks or whatever. And I got into this place of just like this complete victim mentality, to where it was just like, I was so unhappy in like my regular life, in like who I was, how I looked. And I started to eat as a means to like numb myself. And then I started drinking and stuff a lot at the time too, which also like didn't help, obviously. Like in the last phase of my nuclear training, it wasn't like I was drunk. Like I certainly wasn't drunk when I was like going to training, but when I'd get home,
I think it's pretty well known that the military has a lot of functioning alcoholics.
Yeah. And so like when first thing I would do when I would get home from like my work day, like during the prototype phase, like mostly every day was like have a drink. And it wasn't like a beer. It was like a mixed drink, it was like Di Serrano and Coke or Dr. Pepper, whatever. And I have always loved mixed drinks. I still love mixed drinks. I'm not a beer drinker, but that was like one of the first things I did. It was like get home, drink, Call of Duty, something like that, right? Just to like let go of all the stresses of everything. And because during that phase of training, like your job is just...
Would you think it a bit more as a checkout? Like, hey, I'm just checking out for a minute.
For sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. And it was also a way for me to like connect with my now wife, because we were engaged at the time, but she's a gamer too. So we would like do online gaming together as like a way to bond and talk, which was great for me at the time. That kind of like kept me afloat. But we also had like turmoil and stuff earlier in our relationship. Like there's a lot of things that I'm like not proud of as far as the person that I was. I was like very like controlling because I was so uncomfortable with myself that I felt like I wasn't worthy of having someone who loved me. So I like looking back, and she knows we've talked about all this stuff.
Self-sabotage.
Yeah, for sure. And like I treated her like so improperly at the time. And like I don't know how we made it. Like cuz like she had her own stuff too. Like she was not perfect. But like looking back, like we got married super young. We got married when I was 21, and we had known each other since we were like, I guess like 16, and we got together when we were like 19. So we're only together for like 2 years before we got married. And
but when you're 16 and you know somebody for 2 years, you feel like it's forever.
Yeah. And like that's the thing is like even when we met when we were 16, we were just friends. Like she's like a friend of my ex, and my ex like did me wrong, and then this girl ended up telling me about it and lost her friends over it, and so we started hanging out, and then like just fell in love, which was kind of weird, but it worked out, which was cool.
So she's
we're still
a Judas. Married. Okay, got it.
No, like her friend cheated on me and stuff, and like didn't like I was still talking to this girl afterwards, but I didn't know, like we had broken up, but I didn't know she had cheated on me. And so me and my wife were talking, and I was like spilling my guts to her about like how I still had all these feelings for this girl and whatnot. And then she like starts crying. I'm like, why are you crying? And she's like, well, she cheated on you. And I'm like, damn. So I'm over here like crying over this girl, and she had like done me wrong with like multiple people. And so my wife now is like super honest. So she like couldn't keep it from me. And I was like, I'm going to give you like a day to talk to your friends about this before I talk to her. Cause I obviously had a lot of things I wanted to say. But yeah, so like it kind of blew up in my wife's face. And so we started hanging out because I felt bad that she like lost some friends over it like temporarily. And then we ended up getting together later on. And 15 years later, we're still together.
That's crazy. Congrats on that.
Yeah, thanks. So, so that happened. Yeah. So we were playing games and stuff, and I was drinking and stuff. And then as time went on, I then get to my ship, which was like a wake up call too. This was like in 2011. So we got married in 2011 when I was on leave between the time I graduated from my final part of nuke training and then when I actually went to the fleet to become like do the job, which you then have to go through another qual process when you're on your ship.
She's not in service, right?
No.
Okay.
No. So
pretty similar that people in service are like, well, I'm gonna go on deployment. Want to get married?
Yeah. So we were long distance the whole time during all the training stuff, which was like, again, like the most stressful time of my life at that point. So being long distance and then going through our own turmoil, then I like graduate. I'm like, cool, I'm finally going to go to my ship and like do what I came in to do, a year and a half plus, almost 2 years after the time I enlisted to the time I went to my ship, because sometimes there's like a month break between classing up for the certain things. So I go to my ship, I get assigned in October of 11. Get to my ship, and 2 months later, we're leaving on a world tour deployment to go for 8 months. Well, at the time, we thought it was 5 months. It ended up being 8 months. So we got married in September. I go to my ship. She's obviously not with me and stuff because I got stationed in Washington initially, in Everett, Washington, which is just outside of Seattle. But I was only going to be there for like 2 months because our ship was changing its home port to Norfolk, Virginia. So because they're not going to move her there to move her again, so we had her stay in Vegas with her family. And then I was on deployment for 8 months. And then when I got back is when she moved to Virginia with me, because that was like I was gonna be stationed. So long distance, all that. And then I'm like not taking great care of myself. But then I get to my ship and I'm like super focused on trying to get qualified, like all my positions that I have to do for the nuclear power plant. And I'm like, this is cool because I'm actually like operating now. I'm like meeting people. Like the first few months was rough just because you get to the ship and it's kind of like, I hate to say it, but it's kind of like a prison mentality. Like people are very like possessive over certain things, and like you're the new guy, you just get treated like shit. And so I was like, okay, I think it's more
military in general, where you have to earn your stripes, and people they get off on that shit. Like you're gonna earn them because I did. It's very bro-ish, to be honest.
It is for sure. Yeah. So like I get it to an extent. Like you have to earn your stripes, but like I don't know. I've always been the type of person where if I wanted to be a good leader or like wanted to be seen in a good light by a subordinate, I would want to provide them with as many tools as necessary to be the best that they can be. So that way, like, if you take care of your people, they take care of you, sort of thing. So even though like they don't report to me directly, when junior people came onto the ship and I had to train them, I was always trying to treat them with respect. Like they had to earn their stripes. Like I wasn't just like super easy on them, but like you had to give them a certain level of respect because I've been there before and I remember what it's like. And I remember how much it sucks to have someone treat you like shit.
But I think that's a personal approach.
Yeah.
And the personal approach difference with other people would be, like they got a dog in them and they're like, oh, I'm going to get it out on you.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never been that kind of person, and maybe people disagree with that approach, but that's just who I am and it is what it is. But, so yeah, I get to my ship and I'm super focused. I'm doing well. And then we go on deployment and I lose like a pretty good amount of weight on deployment. I don't remember like weight wise, but maybe like 25 pounds. So I got back to like a good weight, and I get back from deployment 8 months later. Now me and my wife are living together in Virginia, and our ship ends up going into shipyard, which is like a big maintenance period for like the next few years. So like that was going to be my only deployment. And then we were just going to be like work. So they have something called like it's like a midlife overhaul of the ship. It's a reactor complex overhaul. Yeah. And so it's literally what it sounds like. All the nuclear reactor stuff, it's a 25-year life reset of the reactors. So where they like pull open the tops of the reactors, take out all the control rods. It's like an insane maintenance thing. Like if you've ever seen an aircraft carrier, you see like the big flight deck on the top. They literally cut giant holes in that thing so that way they can crane out the internals. So it's an insane maintenance thing. It's like a 4 or 5 year thing. So we were there for that. and which is where I got a lot of like the hands-on actual maintenance practices early on, at least. In
So
that
you
field.
worked on the ship then?
Yeah. So,
Oh, wow.
so yeah. So when I was on the ship for deployment, I was there operating like the mechanical side of the reactor plant and all the auxiliary equipment. And then
So you became part of the active staff to rehaul it?
yeah,
Oh,
so
cool.
so you're the operating team when you're out to sea, and then you're operating team when you're in port, like on a shutdown, like to where you're just maintaining certain things, and then there's still periodic maintenance and stuff that you have to do. But then when you are assigned to the ship during like a maintenance period for the they pull it into a dry dock, so like they take it out of the water. So yeah, you're part of the crew for that too. So they bring in like shipyard workers to do some stuff too, but as part of like the reactor department crews, especially as a mechanic, that was like my particular job. Yeah, we were very much part of taking things apart and putting them back together, that sort of stuff. So I got a lot of hands-on like radiological experience during that time, which translates later to what I do for a living now. But we'll get to there. So go through that, and it was a really difficult time, which was kind of weird.
When you say difficult time, can you go into a little bit more detail about the difficulty?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it early on stemmed from the leadership that we were under at the time on the ship. Like, is a pretty bad, and not that they were bad people. It's just that I'm sure that like now that I think back, I'm probably like, these guys are probably going through their own stuff, or I would like to think so. I'd like to give them that credit. But at the time, we had some people that just treated us like shit. And unfortunately, and it got to the point where like I just started to, like you said, just like check out. Like I just stopped caring. I've always been someone who wants to do well in anything that I do, and I just stopped giving a shit. Like I was just like, this is fucking awful. Like I don't want to live like this. Like I don't care about these people. Like I care about the people I work with, like my brothers and sisters that I work with. But aside from that, like none of these people, I can't say none, but most of the people that were in the leadership positions, like none of them gained my respect because of the way that they treated us. And like the hours and schedule that we had to do was just, it just sucked. Like, so they have like a duty rotation, and I think we were on 3-section duty. So it's like every third day you're on the ship for 24 hours straight. So regardless of your regular work schedule. So like, let's just put it, if I had to be on duty on Monday, I was on duty again on Thursday, and then I was also again on duty on the next Sunday. So like sometimes it gets into your weekends because you still work a regular, 9 to 5, not really 9 to 5. It's more like a 7 to 4, 7 to 5, depends, during Monday through Friday. But if your duty day is on the weekend, like screw your weekend. That's just how it goes. And like you become accustomed to that life.
Is it almost like a reservist day? Like you do the week in a month kind of situation, or no? It's
No.
weekly.
So other sections or other departments on the ship were on like a 8 to 10 section duty. So every 8 to 10 days, but because our department is so understaffed, because there's not a lot of people qualified to do what we do, we're on a 2 or 3 section duty. So some people, it was like every other day. But when I was there, it was I believe it was 3 section. So yeah, so it's a lot. Like you're just like living to work kind of. And then when you're at home, depending on your mental status, which my mental state at the time was not good, I was just food and check out, right? And then that was the first time me and my wife were truly living together. So we're going through those growing pains.
That had to be stressful.
Yeah, it was like going through those growing pains, and then like I was still drinking and stuff, and we'd have disagreements, and I would get like super emotional, and it just like sucked. And like it was like never got to the point of like where I was like violent or something with her, but she had this like, she wanted to like, hey, I'm sorry, like, and I'm just like, get the fuck out of my face, you know what I mean? And like it got to the point where like I'm just like trying to walk out of the house to like get out, and she's like, I'm not gonna let you go. And I'm like, get the fuck out of my way. And it like blew up a few times. Like again, never to the point of like physical altercation. Like I've never been that.
You guys are both expressing your emotion and the full intent. Yeah, I got it.
And so it was really rough at the time. And so she was like super lonely because I'm like her only source of happiness and friendship at the time. And I'm also at work all the time.
You're also the reason she moved across country.
Exactly. That's what I mean. So like at the time I didn't really understand how hard that was on her because I was so lost in my own bullshit, and which sucks now, but that's the truth of it. Like I came home and I just wanted to like vegetate, right? So I would like eat and stuff, and like we would always go and get fast food, and it just kind of turned into this habit because she was sad, I was sad, and we've always,
and you did it together.
Correct. We've always both been like super into food, and it was convenient. She's like never really been the type to cook, and like at the time I wasn't really either, so I was just kind of like whatever, dude. So we would just always go and eat, and it turned into a habit, and I was already bigger. And then I started actually like failing my my physical stuff for work, like not the physical aspect, but the body fat. I was like actually failing. And then so for nukes, in the past, because we were in such high demand, like they would typically give waivers for people. Like if you could still like do the physical parts of your job, like you couldn't promote, but you could stay in the military. But then it's like a 3 failure program. They'll kick you for like anybody else. And so I failed 3 times. I was on like a what is it? Like a remediation program to like extra physical fitness that was like a mandated thing. So I would like then have to go in at like 4:30 in the morning before, as my schedule's already still fucked as is, like I told you, then have to go in on top of this and have someone help me work out. And I know what my body doesn't respond to. And I try to tell them this. I'm like, hey, can we try to like tailor this approach differently? And they're like, no, this is how you have to do. You didn't get here by whatever. And I'm like, all right, fine. So I go in and I do it, and I do this for months and months and months, and nothing's helping. I'm not losing weight, but I'm also still eating like shit at home. So I take credit for that now. But at the time, again, I'm not giving a fuck. The person who I was assigned to in that fitness program was a complete dickhead, like just unnecessary, you know? And I just felt like I was constantly under fire, and I just like wanted to withdraw.
I mean, they're also making you look at in an area and confront something that you're obviously running from.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And it was just a tough time. And like, I know I didn't probably handle it the way that I should have. And I take responsibility for it now, but I also feel
handle it the way that you knew how to do then.
Right. Yeah. With the tools that I had. Right. And so, I ended up failing 3. And then at the time, President Obama was downsizing the military pretty significantly. And so they were like my chain of command, which some of the higher ones were like really, really good to me. And like, I did really well in my division. It was just my weight thing was my problem. Like I was still a go-to person. Like I was very well respected by my peers and even the people I reported under, the ones even that I didn't really like. I didn't like how they treated people, but most of the time I was respected under most conditions. But I just didn't like the way that generally we were treated. Like I never really felt significantly targeted on my own, but I saw other people that I cared about being targeted by people just for the sake of wanting to fuck with them. And I was so upset by how we were being treated. I was just like, I can't stand by and like live like this. So
why did you become, how do I want to say this? Something I'm noticing. How did you want to become somebody's justice warrior if you didn't apply that to yourself?
That's a very good question. I don't think I've ever looked at it that way, but it's just, I think it comes from a place of caring about other people before I cared about myself at the time. I had no sense of self-worth. And yeah.
You just touched it why I'm saying that.
Yeah.
It's most of us never make that correlation.
Yeah, man.
You see these people that are like pit bulls for others.
Yeah.
And then you see their life and you're like,
what are you doing for yourself? Yeah. Fuck.
It's external.
Yeah. So, I ended up failing 3, and then, it came down to where they were actually going to process me out. And I was like, oh shit, like this is actually happening. So then my chain of command was trying to like save me. They wrote,
so hold on. Somebody might not understand. I'm assuming you're losing your money. You're losing your job. You're like everything, right?
So yes and no. So basically, and obviously depending on the circumstances may be different for other people, but typically when you get processed out, like you still get, well, again, I don't know for everyone else. I know what happened for me and I'll get into it, but it's an honorable discharge. You basically just get out early. And then if you like got any, like let's say you signed up for an extra amount of years and got an enlistment bonus that you didn't fulfill or something, then you'd have to pay a portion of that back if that was the case. So for me, I was originally on a 6-year contract. I ended up getting out at 4 because of this. Like my chain of command, like I think it was like a lieutenant commander or somebody, he like wrote to our, I don't want to say headquarters, but someone in DC and stuff to try to save me, and they couldn't do anything. Like their hands were tied. And so I ended up getting...
Could you relate a little bit from the other side of understanding that here's this thing that's specifically to you and you don't know how to, you do everything else, but you can't manage this one thing on your own. Could you see how that would be an issue for them?
Yeah, I can now. I just don't think that there was... It's an issue for them, but I also feel like they didn't acknowledge the issues of how their actions and their lack of leadership led to people being in a state that gets them there.
100%.
And that's across the board for the military. Like still to this day, like people don't understand. They don't understand like what, and maybe they do and they just don't care. But like there is so much to taking some, like, yeah, you're volunteering. People are like, oh, that's what you signed up for. Like, I don't care. It's like, okay, well, it's still difficult to take someone out of their normal life and literally like uproot everything that they've ever known, put them in a different state, and then like not take care of them. Like I don't know. Like I don't want to get into it too much in that because I'm very opinionated in this place. Like I'm super big on mental
just
health.
talk about it more in the holistic sense, right? And I think you can, because I think this is good, especially with people that are in the military. They don't, let's say PTSD, right?
Yeah.
You are a child.
Yeah.
You're trained for war, but you're not prepared for war.
Correct.
There's the mental aspect of that, right?
Yeah.
And then you take these people that may be on the brink of some sort of mental item, and then you break them.
Yeah.
And then the psychopaths get rewarded because now they'll go do anything, right?
Yeah.
And they're just like the golden child.
Yeah.
And then you have all these other people that are basically left and say, hey, those demons, thank you for your service. Go deal with those on your own. And if you have no mechanism, you have no support structure, your family doesn't come from a like, hey, let's talk.
Yeah.
Let's have an open discussion.
Right.
You are returned to your childlike inability, but with all of this debt.
Oh God. Yeah.
So like you see how I'm speaking about that like holistically.
Yeah.
It's not particular to anyone.
Right.
But I think that that's what we're not acknowledging. And, you know, to pontificate here for a second, we're not acknowledging that that's America right now.
Oh, for sure.
We just went through so many wars. So many people saw so much violence, and created violence upon others. No judgment on me, right, wrong.
Yeah,
it's just let's look at it objectively.
Oh, for sure.
And then you send those people back to a situation that maybe wasn't conducive, and it's pretty known. Most people go to the military for a reason.
Yeah,
they don't have a good home life.
Yeah,
they're escaping something, and that's the easiest lever to pull. Right?
Yeah, for many, yes. I wouldn't say it's everybody. It is for many, for sure.
No, for sure. I'm speaking more of the larger bucket of things.
Yeah.
It's not a one for one, but it's if we look at the numbers, statistically, you would say it's people who come from low income, people that maybe come from really bad situations, and that's their easy way out. Like you can get reset. 18, you can gut me from whatever drama I got going on.
True.
The challenge is they're gonna return one day. And because we have no program in the military to say, hey, we're about to go send you to real life again. Let's process you for a year into regular life. It's thank you. See you later.
Yeah. They do have a program, and it's like a 1 or 2 week thing where they try to help you like write a resume, but it's not preparing you for real life. It's just try to get you to understand that the language that you speak in the military does not reflect well in the civilian world. So how do you make sense of this is what I did in the military to this is what I can do outside? That's really all that program did, at least at the time. It might be different now. It's called TAPS. I don't even remember what it stands for, but it's basically preparing you to get discharged, right?
Yeah, and I've seen other people be in programs where they send you to boot camps or to like certification programs so they could say, oh, well, at least here's some veterans that are certified.
Right.
And I think that that's a great, conceptually phenomenal idea.
Yeah.
In practice, you didn't do much. That's like me giving somebody $5 on the street.
Yep.
Great idea. Not going to change them much. You know what I mean? Like or their current situation.
True. So I ended up failing the 3 physical fitness things, and like I said, I was getting ready to get processed out. I forgot to touch on one thing that also happened at the same year that when I got back from deployment and everything hit the fan. So my mom and the dad that I mentioned earlier, he was actually my stepfather, but he's been around my life since I was like 7 or 8. So he's dad to me. He's the one that was a prior Navy SEAL, all that. They were going through a really ugly divorce back home. And so I've got my mom talking to me one side of the table, my dad talking to me the other side of the table. Then my mom like doesn't want me to have anything to do with my dad. And then I'm trying to like figure out what's true, what's not. I've got like my mom was, and me and my mom have like recently reconciled, but there was a whole bunch of stuff that happened at the time where like she was. So
your debt had interest is what you're saying.
Oh dude. You have no idea. There was just so much going on in my life at the time and I didn't know how to process it. And like, I loved my family life before. Like I'm an only child, but me and my parents, like when I was a teenager and stuff, we would like like my dad took us to like Italy and stuff. Like we had a good life because at the time he was doing real estate and he had like his own pool business and stuff. So like things were great up until like 2008, obviously. So we weren't rich by any means, but we were well off. Like we could go and do stuff. I didn't have to worry about how I was going to have food on the table sort of thing.
So you're true middle class is what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like my dad loved to live. Like he wanted to like go and live it up and give us those experiences. So yeah, I was able to do cool things like that when I was a teenager. And then I'm in the military. I'm already going through my own like depressive stuff. And then this like rocks my world. And then my mom got to the point where she was telling me all these things and I was trying to decipher what was true and what wasn't. And I'm not trying to call anyone a liar and like, I'm not going to get into that space, but, there were things that didn't make sense on both sides of the table. And then like the rest of my family, like my aunts, uncles, extended cousins, grandma, all that stuff, were like only hearing my mom's side, but nobody was actually like hearing my dad's side.
I think that the hardest challenge with going through a divorce is that you have two people that are very emotionally distraught, trying to process emotions with all the fallout with everybody around it.
Yeah.
It's so difficult.
Yeah.
That like nobody wins.
Oh, for sure. It was terrible. It was like war, like family warfare. And so I was trying to like, I just kept telling them both. I was like, listen, like I get that this is how you feel about this other person. And I'm sorry that this like where things have gotten, but I need you to both understand that I still love both of you. And just because you two are being divorced doesn't mean that I'm divorcing one of you. Like I still want to have my own independent relationship with both of my parents that I have. This is the family I've known since I was a child. Like, yeah, granted, he hasn't been around since I was born, but he's been my dad since I was 7. Like, you don't bring someone into my life and then just not make him my dad anymore.
And I think that is, you know, I have a little bit of experience with this. I have kids through marriage, and you know, my father was remarried 5 times, so he loved the idea of marriage, didn't really stand for marriage, and some of the challenges he had was, my learning through this was, okay, a step parent comes in. As a kid, you don't replace your real parent,
right?
Like that didn't go away. I still have a father or a mother or whatever that he is, and trying to take the approach that I am replacing them. You will never replace them.
Yeah,
you just won't. But you could always be the best version of yourself to them,
right? So that's what was interesting about this one too, is because my biological father has like never been in my life too. So like the last time I saw him when I was literally months old. Like him and my mom had a really terrible thing. He was involved in a bunch of like really bad shit at the time. And so my mom, like essentially there was like a whole thing, like he kidnapped me like for a day or two. And like, there was a whole big drama thing when I was like a baby. And then my mom ended up lying to him and telling him that I wasn't his kid, which was like the best decision she's ever made, in my opinion, because it like kept me away from that life that he lived. And then, but he always like, he's actually reached out to me also around this time when I was in the Navy, like during this last year when I'm in Virginia, he reaches out to me and tries to talk to me. And it was like, there was so much stuff going on. And
so I want to make sure that we call that out. You have to see how all of these roads are leading to one place, and they're stacking.
Yeah.
And and again,
I've never even looked at it like this until this moment.
There we go.
Yeah.
I love food. Love food.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody that knows me knows I will get down on some shit. And food could have been drugs for me. Food could have been alcohol. Yeah. Food could have been sex.
For sure.
So none of this should be associated to just food. Just know it's the behavior, the mechanism for us. The lever that I pull was food, but it could have been any of those.
Yeah.
So like for anybody listening, if one of those levers is not food like it is for us, you still have to listen. Yeah. This is for all of us.
Yeah, it's still applicable. Yeah. So yeah, at the time it was alcohol and food for me. And, so I've had like, you know, I was having my extended family members calling me like, why are you doing this to your mom? And like all this stuff. And it literally like for a few years, I had like 90% of my family essentially turned against me because they believed that they were hearing half of the story. And then like later on, a few years later, some of my cousins reached out to me and they're like, hey, can we talk about this? And then they actually allowed me to speak. And then they heard and they were like, that's not what was said. And I'm like, well, I was like, I don't have a reason to lie to you. Like I will take ownership for my part in it. Like I'm not, you know, innocent. Like I said a lot of things out of emotion at the time that I shouldn't have said. And literally, so this happened in 2013, what I'm talking about right now, just within the last like, I guess month, I just had this conversation with my mom, and I was like, listen, you and me are never going to see eye to eye on these things, but I apologize for how I made you feel. Like that, I never meant to make you feel the way that I made you feel by the things that I said, but this has gone on for 10 years and it affected me and my mom's relationship up until this point. And I finally was just like, I'm not going to sit here and say who's wrong, who's right. That's not what this is about. I'm sorry that I made you feel this way. And I just want you to know that I am in a better place now mentally to process certain emotions, and I understand the weight of my words, and I'm sorry. And I take responsibility for my part in hurting you, because I never meant to make you feel that way. And it was a great conversation, you know, but it took a long time to get there.
So I need to acknowledge you again. That's a big step, massive. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if for whoever's listening who has not had to find the strength to have that conversation in your head, probably a whole bunch of times before ever delivering it. Secondly, to know that you have to work through all those emotions that come up. And then lastly is actually delivering it, which is the biggest step. So congrats to you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, but again, like I didn't feel safe to do it yet. And like you said, I've gone over what I was going to say so many times in my head, and I don't know. I was afraid of like what the outcome would be, but I knew that at the end of the day, I needed to say my piece, because for her and for myself, because like I understand how when someone is hurting, having someone else also hurting you externally, even though they may not mean to, like what it can do to you. And I know that my mom was like going through a lot at the time too. And I think at the time I was just so lost in my own sorrow that I wasn't acknowledging like everyone else was hurting in their own way. But now looking back at it and actually having like a real understanding of like, you had 3 really emotional people communicating in an emotional state all the time. And then you've got other people butting in and giving their 2 cents, when it's like, honestly, what's going on between me, my mom, and my dad is none of your guys' fucking business. Like you can be there and support her, but what's between me and her should be between me and her. What's between me and him should be between me and him. Right. But it wasn't. And it is what it is now, but that's very much the way it should have been.
But that's not how this world is.
I know.
And everybody believes they have an opinion. And a lot of people believe, hey, man, you got to listen to what I'm saying right now because it's important. I think one of the critical things that you're pointing out right now is people have to focus on what is important.
Right.
And everything else has to be noise.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you live in chaos.
Yeah. You're in like a constant state of static because there's too much noise. And that's literally what began to happen. Is there was so much going on at once, and I literally felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, and I like wasn't able to stand on my own, let alone taking all this other stuff. And so I ended up getting processed out of the military. So I got an honorable discharge. I kept all my benefits and stuff, and I didn't have to like repay anything because I had fulfilled the initial part of my contract more or less. So I didn't have to like pay anything back, which was cool. But literally on 10 days notice, they're like, hey, you're gonna be out of the military in 10 days. So you can imagine how that goes. Like we had just gotten a new place to rent. Like we had just moved in. So I now have to move out. Like I have a bunch of debt.
Stuff.
I have a bunch of debt that I've been accruing because I'm thinking like I'm good for the next X amount of years. And then now I'm like, hey, we have to move back to Las Vegas in 10 days and get my life together. And I have no job lined up, whatever. And so, but
it's still a hard transition to go from a purely very specialized tool in the military to
how's this going to translate into the regular world? Like, it'll land me somewhere, but where is that? And like, how quick can I get there? Right. And so, and then also like having to explain like, I got out. Typically most people know that nukes do like 6 years, and they're gonna be like, oh, why'd you do 4? And then I got to explain that like, oh yeah, because I was a fat piece of shit. Like that's what some people, I literally had, like, I applied for a job when I came back, and I got asked that question, and I told him like, hey, I had this, these physical fitness problems or whatever. And he's like, oh, you probably shouldn't tell people that. He's like, I'm not interested. And I'm like, damn,
he's a fucking piece of shit.
I know. Said that. It's okay. It's whatever. His loss. Like everything that has happened, including all the terrible things that we're talking about and what led me up to what broke me, is literally what redirected me to the path that I'm on today. So I'm thankful for each and every one of those like very difficult moments, because it is the foundation of who Danny is today.
And I'm going to pull up this quote right now because Ozzy, remember we were talking about this earlier. Sorry, that's somebody else in the room right now with us. And I said there was a beautiful quote that is by Rumi that I saw, or that I didn't see, obviously, that I read. But let me pull that up just quick because I want to read it to you. I want to get your live response to it, like your reaction. Sorry. And let me pull it up. No, that's not it. Okay, this is the quote by Rumi. It says, "The wound is the place where the light enters you."
Yeah. Man, I like that. Send me that, please, too, because I like that one. It's so true. It's you have to. The way I look at it now is that you have to see what the dark feels like to like truly
To find the light.
to find the light, but also to appreciate the light. Like I would never appreciate the life that I live now had I not gone through all these things that I went through before.
So can we pause there for a second? Because that's something I want to explore with you a little bit more because you're a different perspective, right?
Yeah.
So I love the quote. I read it and I was like, beautiful. Like that. Yeah. He was a poet. I don't know if you know that. Rumi was a poet back in the 1200s. And
Okay.
he's one of the Stoics. We'll get into that another time. But it was something that was just, I'm not great with words, but he was amazing at being concise of like explaining an idea. And for that, when we avoid the pain, as both you and I know well, obviously, and when we want to bury our head, we're constantly up against the wall that allows us to grow. And when you're closest to it is when you feel the most resistance. And that's usually when we all quit.
Yeah.
Because it's hard.
Because it's the true breaking point.
Of course.
It's I'm up against the wall and everything's closing in on me. You either let it like crush you or you push back.
Correct. And the reason I say that is because that's what growth feels like.
Yeah. It hurts.
It never gets easier.
Right.
What you rely on is experience to say, I haven't died yet. So this too shall pass.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, you slow your growth.
Yeah.
When you constantly go up against it, that's when you see your life change drastically. I think you have experienced that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to like go against the grain and then you see like what that effort of fighting against your tendencies and fighting against all of like the demons that we talk about is like fighting back and not letting them win. It is a super uphill battle. And at first it feels like it's pointless. It feels like you're not gaining any traction until one day you have like this, wow, like, I don't even remember what that feels like. Like not that you don't remember what it feels like, but it seems like you're so far removed from where you once were. And then like right now, like I can talk about all these things because I remember the feelings, but it feels like it was so long ago and it really wasn't. Like when you think about like the perspective of the timeline of my life, these things, because I got out in 2013, but this continued up until I was at my highest weight ever in early 2021, 450 plus pounds 3 years ago this month.
And so I posted on social media the other day, and this is what I said, because I was reminiscing on a thought very similar to this. And I posted, everything you want is on the other side of what makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, oh dude, it's so true. Like everything that is worth going for, there's a lot of resistance, but if you can break through that initial self-doubt and that fear, there's like so much great possibility on the other side of that. But it's like you have to be willing to like push the door open and see what's on the other side, because it's like you got to think of it as like there's all these, it's a fear of the unknown, right? Like what is my life going to look like? Am I going to be able to get there? What happens if I fail? You ask yourself all these questions, but when you give yourself the ultimatum of like, I won't fail because there's no option. That's like what happened for me eventually, like what led me to my catalyst of change. Yeah.
Can you say that again though? Well, how did you describe it?
As like you get to this point where you have no other option.
You mean I got to the point.
Yeah, correct. Like, so I got to the point of there's no I don't have an option to fail. If I fail, like I'm going to die, whether it's like due to health reasons or like mentally checking myself out.
So you accepted the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. I realized how bad my life had gotten and how much of a part I took in that. And the fear of change and what was required of me to change seemed less daunting and less scary than continuing to live the misery that I was living. That's like literally what changed my life. Was the way I live on a day-to-day is so mentally and physically painful that I cannot continue to exist in this state.
And if I can ask you a question about that,
Yeah.
in retrospect,
Yeah.
meaning you today, how crazy is it to look back and realize that it was never that bad? Meaning it wasn't for you life or death. It was simply a continuous drip of water that you never stopped. You could have stopped it a long time ago and you would have been fine.
Yeah.
We all can't stop somebody or rob them of their learning moment.
Yeah.
If I would have came into your life and said, Danny, you're getting to the fucking gym today. We're going together. I would have robbed you from that moment where epiphany. It was your moment.
True.
Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. I talk about this a lot with a lot of different people. And like what you said, everyone has to have their own learning experience, their own epiphany. I've had so many of my friends, family over the years be like, hey, we're worried about you. Try to talk to me, try to help me, make recommendations. And it's not like I didn't try to work out or try to eat better. There was times like throughout this 2013, well, I guess 2010 is when it started when I was in the military, but 2013 is when I got out. And then up until 2021 was like, it really snowballed from there because I was already like, I got out of the military and I was already 300 plus pounds by the time I got out. Okay. So remember we said at the end of boot camp, I was like 184 or something like that. And then I was maintaining good for a while around 220. 220 was like the best physique I ever had because like I had muscle. I had great endurance.
You and I are built for the ice age.
Yeah, right. And so I felt great at that time. That was like the best I've ever felt physically. And then I just slowly snowballed and then I would like gain a bunch of weight and I'd lose some, but then it wasn't maintained. Like I couldn't maintain it. And it was like, I've always knew that I had a problem with my weight. So I would try to eat good. Or eat well, eat well. And then I would like work out, but I was never had the discipline to really maintain it. And I was like, man, like, what am I doing wrong? But it was this constant self-sabotage.
So I'll share with you what I used to do, which I think is fucking hilarious now. So I was totally into P90X when that was out and I was cramming it at home and I would end up sweaty and I would be like, you know what? I did really good. I'm going to go eat a full fucking double cheeseburger and fries because I earned this one. That was me.
Yeah. I was the same person too. So I was like, man, I went and ran today. I did a bunch of this, a bunch of that. And I'm like, let's go get some Olive Garden or whatever. Right. And it was just like, oh, it's not bad because it's not McDonald's. Like, bitch, it's still a lot. Like you're still getting like 1,500 calories or whatever in your meal. And of course I'm gonna eat the whole damn thing because I'm a young growing boy. Right. So yeah, it was a
Mama
constant.
didn't raise no bitch. I'm not leaving nothing.
Exactly. And so over time, it got worse and I got bigger. So yeah, 185 from boot camp graduation, get out of the military at over 300. And this is in the course of 4 years. So just to keep that perspective, right? I think I got out around like 320, something like that. And I was still, just so you know, I was still able to do all the physical fitness stuff. Again, just could not pass the body fat stuff. I could still almost max sit-ups at 300 plus pounds.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Like I wasn't like I was like this decrepit being that couldn't perform my job function. I was just a big boy, you know? And anyway, so I ended up getting out and then I worked some different jobs over the years here, nothing in the nuclear industry for a long time. At first it sucked. It was really difficult. I worked for my dad's company for a little bit just to try to help me get on my feet. And then my mom had an issue with that because of everything that was going on at the time. Ended up getting to like another random, I worked at like a fucking credit card company as like a fraud analyst, which the job was cool, but it didn't pay shit. I was getting like 13 something an hour. And at the time I was like, okay, cool. This is better than nothing. Cause you know, you got to do what you got to do. Right.
Well, it's also how you feel your worth is. You're like, I'll take it.
True. Yeah. And so after that, I ended up like working 2 years, like, they have something called headhunters for Navy nukes, like for specific jobs in the military. So I was contacted by a headhunter that was like, hey, we have this company that's trying to hire like a field service technician for like water purification systems. So they just needed someone with mechanical aptitude that could know how to operate and stuff. I was like, all right, cool. did that. And then I was making like 28 an hour at the time. I was like, oh, this is like way better, like double what I was making. I'm like, I'm not my own boss, but I worked as like a satellite for our Phoenix office. So I worked in Vegas by myself. So I managed all the customer accounts out here, did all the stuff. The only thing that sucked is I was on call all the time because I was the only guy. So, I get a call at like 3 a.m. from a hospital that's like, hey, our laboratory system just took a shit. You need to come fix it. And that sucks. But so I did that for 2 years. And then all this time I'm still gaining weight. But I numbed myself with like a passion for cars. Like I'm a super big car guy. So I was just like, everything I do is going into cars. Like I was racing cars, all this shit. And then I work for like
So you made money and then you just continuously spent it.
Yeah. And that was the other problem is like, cause we didn't have like our own place. We're like, renting a room at my friend's house. Cause like we were like in our, I guess mid-20s at the time. And I'm like, oh, this is cool, whatever. And so, yeah, we're just spending money stupidly and not really like doing anything to advance our future. Me and my wife both. Right.
Which is very common for people in mid-20s.
Like you get comfortable and you're just like, whatever, this is chill. And so, still was having a lot of mental health issues at the time and the lack of like self-worth. But again, I would just numb myself with food and I would try to like not pay attention to it. But I began to acknowledge it more because I began to talk to some more of my friends about it. And I had like, moments of weakness of like, I would break down and I would just like spill my guts to somebody. And they were just like, holy shit. Like I would have never guessed that you were going through all this because you put on such a good mask. Right. And so I started to really,
can we pause there for a second?
Yeah.
Because these are really big introspective points.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we let them breathe as much as we can.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. I know I'm going like a million miles an hour.
No, it's perfect. I love it. So let's look at that for a second.
Okay.
When you're in that mental state, you wouldn't articulate any of it in this way.
No, not at all.
So let's go back to that and articulate it in a way where you were at that moment.
Oh man. Yeah, I don't remember exactly what I said, but if I had to venture a guess as to some of it, I would just kind of be like, I've like fucked my whole life up. Like I'm worthless. Like Melissa's my wife. Melissa's so good to me. And I'm just like this fat piece of shit. Like I can't even take care of myself. How can I take care of her? Like,
So for everybody listening or watching this right now, you have to take a pause.
Yeah.
And reflect on your own internal voice at this moment. What does that conversation look like? And if it sounds anything similar to Danny, recognize you are Danny and recognize that I'm Danny.
Yeah.
Because we all have an internal voice that's ours to own. Mm-hmm. And if you are not going to fix it, who's going in there?
Yeah. No one's going to save you. Yep.
It's a lonely place.
It's super lonely.
So this is one of those seeds to plant for where you are today, that you had to go and listen to that voice, not hear it, to listen. And then you had to start making choices. Right. That's got to change. Yeah. That can't be a conversation I have with myself. That can't be who lives in there.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to you have to be nice to yourself. Like you can't, like your inner voice is a reflection of your own way that you feel about yourself. It's like, it's a reflection of your self-love or self-hate. And so that voice that you hear, all that self-doubt, all that you can't do this, you're not worth it, you're not worthy of love, whatever, comes from a place of how you feel about yourself, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. It's your subconscious, but it's literally you speaking to yourself. And however you feel about yourself and your situation is a reflection of how that voice communicates with you.
And that's the trip. Today, looking back, you can see it. Yeah. But when you're in the thick of it, and for anybody else listening to this where you might resonate with, I think I'm in the thick of it, there's your start. There's your step one. Just be kind to yourself. Yeah. And if you don't deserve to be kind, go fix that. Go deserve kindness. True. By being kind to yourself. And then all the dominoes will fall into place with time. Yeah. Right. You have, Rome wasn't built in a day. Yeah. Right.
It takes time.
Yeah. Correct. So keep going with your story.
Yeah. Yeah. So that happened and I would start to like acknowledge it, but wasn't really doing anything to change the situation. I was just acknowledging how broken I was because I was like, man, like the military thing, even though like I got an honorable discharge, kept all my stuff, I still looked at myself as a failure. I felt like other people viewed me as a failure. And then I came back. But at the time when it happened, because when I got out of the military, because I was so upset with the circumstances, I was actually happy to get out because I was just like, I don't know if I could like survive another 2 years, like mentally. Like that's how gone I was. And I was like, okay, cool. I get to go home. Like I'm good with this. Like I'm not getting a dishonorable discharge. I keep all my stuff. Like, but the stresses of the money stuff, the financial part, we already had a bunch of debt because, you know, you're 21 or 23 at the time, 23-year-old, like freshly married couple. Like you're not paying attention to your finances the way you should, honestly, you know? And then, yeah. So as time goes on, I just continue to look at myself as this like failure of a person, like so far disconnected from this man that I viewed myself the man who I wanted to become. I was like, man, like you're nothing like what you had set out to do years ago. Right. And coming from the place of, did it just disconnect? Okay. So, the place, oh, sorry, it just kind of like threw me off. What was the last thing we were talking about?
You're talking about your finances.
Okay.
Your finances, being 23 years old, not really looking at finances. You're coming back and you're basically having a realization.
Oh, yeah. So I viewed myself as like this far disconnected person from this like goal of who I set out to be initially. And like I always did well in high school and stuff. Like I had like a 4.6 or 4.7 GPA, like weighted GPA, but like I always tried to do well, you know? So like failure was kind of a little bit of a new thing for me. And I was just kind of like, I don't know how this is going to work. So with that being said, I just continued to not be kind to myself, continued to eat my fucking sorrows away. And over time, it got really bad. I ended up leaving that technician job and then going and working for the water district, Las Vegas Valley Water District, as like a control room operator there, which was like a really cool job. I was like, cool, like this is a job I'm going to retire from. Like this is fucking awesome. So I go in there and I'm like the youngest.
So hold on, pause, because something that you're kind of browsing through what you just said. You essentially said, oh, wow, look, I found comfort.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, I found comfort, but it was a security thing. It was like, okay, I've always heard like if I could get into a job like this and it make decent money that like I can make a living and like I'll know that I'm safe, right? So that goes back to the comfort thing. And I was like, cool, like this is, granted, it's not nuclear power, but it's operations related stuff. So a lot of the things that I had done in the Navy translated very well, which is why I got hired there. And I worked there for a while, and I was the youngest operator of a team of like 10 to 12 of us, probably by like 15 years at the time, maybe 10, 12 years, but a lot of them were a lot older. And so there were a lot of generational differences. And, you know, like I got not bitched at, but complained about for the way I dressed, my tattoos, like the way I sat in my chair. Like nobody was ever fucking happy. And
everybody was nitpicking you.
Yeah, and I was just like, what the fuck? And then like I'm doing well from the actual job perspective, but then like my boss is hearing all this feedback from the other operators because he doesn't take notes, he's not trying to learn. Like I'm not that type. Like I'm typically not the type of person that takes notes when I learn. That's not how I learn. Like if I have a problem with something, I will start taking notes. But otherwise, like I'm usually pretty what's the word where it's like photographic memory. Like I'm very much like that. Like somebody shows me something, I can pick it up and like retain it. And so I learned really quickly. I was able to like start operating there.
Well, that's also not fair because there's people that learn by repetition of note.
Yeah.
You just aren't like that. So for them to say, well, because you're not doing things my way, you're not.
Yeah.
You're not trying.
Trying. Yeah. So it like came to a head, and there were some things that were said about me that were not true. And I'm not even going to get into all that, but I was supposed to be on probation for 6 months before you're officially like part of a union and like protected. And they're like, oh, we're going to extend your probation to 9 months. And I'm like, all right, fine. So I like continued to do it. And then at like eight months and like 2 weeks, or 8 months and 3 weeks, I like came into work one day and my badge like wouldn't work to get in the building. And I'm like, what the fuck's going on? And then like I get let in the building, and then my boss comes out. She's like, hey, let's go over this conference room. I'm like, okay, cool. And she's like, hey, you're being let go. And because of XYZ, like you're being accused of like sleeping on the job and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? And like, I had no opportunity to defend myself. Of course, HR wasn't there. This whole fucking thing. And so I get walked out, and I'm just like, here we are again. Like, and at this time, me and my wife were waiting to close on our new house.
Back to the unknown that we were talking about that you didn't deal well with.
Yeah. Yeah. And also feeling like I was like ruining the future that me and my wife were now starting to focus on. We were literally a month and a half away from closing on our first home that we're purchasing together. because I finally was like, hey, I'm not gonna do the cars. Let's get our own place. Like I still had cars, but I was like putting more focus into being an adult and trying to fortify a good living with my wife.
So being the victim, in that victim mindset, it's like, here's life again, kicking me in the nuts.
100%. Yeah. And so I went home that day, and I was like sitting there, and I was just like, I don't know. Oh no, I was on my way home. That's what it was. My wife was still sleeping, and I was like, damn, like, how am I gonna tell her that I like this happened, you know? And so I get home and I tell her, and then I like start applying for jobs. Like I didn't just like wait. And thankfully I found another job, which was like a contract job for a few months that was doing like it was like a contract job at another like water treatment facility out here.
But that didn't help that you were trying to buy a house. I'm assuming
It did, because it was in the same field, the same job field. They were able to save it. So we were able to get the house. But so the contract was supposed to be for 6 months, and then it ended up getting cut down to 3. So right after we closed on the house, like maybe a month and a half after we closed on the house, then that other contract gets cut short. And then not just for me, but for everybody on the team. So I was like, okay, now I'm out of a job again. I have a new house and I don't have a way to pay for it. I don't really have like a good savings, like anything. And I was just sitting there and I was like applying for stuff, and I had interviewed even before I got that little contract job for a while. I had interviewed out where I work now, which I'm not like going to get into all that stuff, but I'm a government contractor now, and very good job. But I had interviewed there, but their process like takes a long time. So I never heard anything back. So I just assumed I didn't get it, because I interviewed there in June, shortly after I had gotten let go at the other place. And so maybe it was July. Anyways, so this is now like September when this is all happening. And I was literally like sitting there in my living room by myself. My wife was at work, and I'm like looking around at our new beautiful home. And I'm like, you're going to lose all of this because you don't have a job, and you...
Back to that internal conversation.
Yeah.
This is what that sounds like.
You're not enough. And I'm just going to be super raw. I sat there and I like grabbed my shotgun, and I was going to like end myself. And sorry, that's like a lot.
I want to acknowledge you for that. Can I take a moment?
Yeah.
Nobody else is in this room pouring their heart out for somebody to hear. And whoever hears this, I hope you take this moment to realize what that feels like. And for a person to be able to acknowledge themselves and say that, I'm here with you, brother. Yeah. Like, we're in this together. So the reason why I want to acknowledge you is because it takes a lot of strength. Yeah. And for anybody else that's out there that you feel this way, realize that's not going to solve anything. Yep. That is simply you wanting to escape again. Yep. The problems stay, you go.
Yeah, I go, and then the problems stay for everybody else who loves me.
Correct.
And then I break other people's lives too. So
here's the introspection, right? to really let this in for anybody listening. You have to understand you had to overcome such a sea of emotion in that moment to not make that decision. Yeah. And you're not doing it with a room full of people that are trying to hold your hand, that are trying to talk to you. You are on your own, which I think that might be another massive moment for you in your life. Those moments that we have to overcome things where no one else is. There's no support. Yeah. So acknowledgement to you, man. Congrats for doing that.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. So I was sitting there, and I was like contemplating doing it. And then like the thing that pulled me out of it was like thinking about, I had like this vision of my wife coming home and finding me like that, obviously. And I was like, I can't do this to her. And I sat there for a long time, just in silence, like with the gun there and everything. And I ended up like going and putting it back upstairs. So there was another layer of like, okay, I then have to go all the way back upstairs if I want to get this again. Like, this gives me a buffer. I go back downstairs, and I'm just like, okay, relax. Like, give yourself a little bit of like time to just chill. Like, we're in a really bad state right now. Relax. I like call my wife. I didn't tell her this till later on, but I just told her, I was like, hey, I'm having a rough day. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing you when you get home. And like 3 or 4 hours after that, I got a call for the job that I work at now.
That is fucking crazy.
Same fucking day, dude. And I was just like, yeah, like
Can we pause there for a second?
Yeah.
We just had a conversation where you and I acknowledged that everything gets worse. And that's your moment of breakthrough.
Yeah.
So can for 1 second acknowledge yourself that
Yeah.
this is how life works. I don't know what your mom told you, what your grandma told you. The shit doesn't work like that.
Right.
This is what life is like.
Yeah.
Fuck that camera, by the way. I don't know why it keeps turning off. Well,
Okay.
I'm going to buy another one.
Okay.
But this is important, this conversation. Anybody listening, this is what it looks like. Stop kidding yourself.
Yeah.
There's no unicorns. There's no prince. There's no princess that shows up for you. In what you believe is your darkest moment, you are the hero of that story. Nobody else.
That's true.
Nobody else needs to be your hero. You are the hero.
Yeah.
So when you feel dark, please take Danny's story and recognize that he is the hero of his story. Not because he wanted to,
Right.
not because you had to. It's because you had to make the choice. Choosing is the hard part.
It is, because it's a lot easier to just decide to check out and not deal with all of the fallout of everything.
Correct.
But as if you make that decision, you eliminate all possibility of what could have been elsewhere, right? And that's, I don't know, something just aside from even the wife thing, it just something was like, you're not done. And I still can't really explain that to this day, because I was not in the mentality at the time to really think
Like
that way.
Introspect, yeah.
It was almost like, felt like something was like telling me like, hey, stop, you're not done. Right. And it wasn't my internal voice, and it wasn't like an audible thing. It was like a received feeling almost of like, hey, something was trying to communicate with me, or whatever it was. And you can call it God or source or whatever people want to talk about it as. I kind of take that as some higher power in some way communicating with me to relax.
Let me challenge that for a second, or challenge that thought. Why couldn't it just be you?
It might have been
Your real voice.
It's possible, but but it didn't feel like it because I hadn't heard that voice before. Like,
So pause right there.
yeah.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Okay.
Here you're going through trials and tribulations.
Yeah.
You have this ugly voice inside of you, right?
Yeah, he's a
not
dick.
voice, but this conversation, this person that lives inside your head that's not very kind.
Yeah. He's really mean.
And then you have to face that coldness of that voice.
Yeah.
And then you have to face a decision. And you
Yeah.
did. And thank you so much for sharing that. You did that.
Yeah.
Because we all face it in a different way. This just happened to be yours.
Right.
Somebody might want to drink themselves to death. Somebody might want to just drive the car off the ledge. We all have something, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment is where you find the way to let go.
True.
And letting go is, I have to make a choice. Either I'm going through with this and that's it. It's a wrap. That's your learning.
Yeah.
Or you walk from that and you say, I have to look now. And when my own opinion of this, when you face that choice, that's when that other conversation starts.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, because that wasn't even like the first time that I had almost decided to check out. That was just the closest that I'd ever truly come. Like,
You had to make the choice. These are sexy thoughts before.
yeah.
They're just sexy thoughts. Because, I could probably do that and fuck this. But we've all had thoughts like that.
Right.
We've all said like, it'd be dope. I just beat that person up. Whatever that might be. It's just something nasty, right?
Right. Right.
It's the act of choosing.
Yeah. That was definitely the closest that I'd ever come to really doing it. And anyways, I got that job, and I ended up working there, and I was still struggling with my weight. By this point, I was probably 390 to 400 at the time. And so now, even though life circumstances were starting to get better from a financial perspective of trying to lessen the stress a little bit. And then I was like trying to work out, I would do things, but again, I didn't have the discipline to maintain. Right. And that was like really what I had to learn. And so as time went on, I did like really well in my first job, promoted early. And then, I then ended up like 2.5 years later, I guess, moving to another position within the company, which is now the group that I'm the manager of that group. So I'm still there. Everything has been great as far as work goes. But during that time period, so that end of 2018 is when I started working for this company as a contractor. And then 2021, March of 2021 was the time when things truly shifted as far as like trying to take care of myself. Well, I guess it was the year before is when I made the decision. So like I said, I had been trying to work out, trying to eat well, all that sort of stuff. But the issue was my discipline, and I was never able to maintain. So rather than continuing to go through this yo-yo of weight, I was like, I need to make a decision that forces me to adhere to something.
Force is a particular choice of words. Why force?
So because the decision that I ended up making is I actually went and got a surgery, which is called a vertical sleeve gastrectomy, where they take your stomach, and it's not like the lap band thing. They actually go in and they cut out 90% of your stomach and then re-sew it back together. So it's like a 10% version of it, because your stomach's a muscle, so it can stretch out over time. And the problem with that is when your stomach stretches out, the bigger it is, it produces more of a hormone called ghrelin, which is what your appetite is based on. So the bigger your stomach is, not only can you fit more in it, but you're also more hungry. So it takes more for you to be satisfied. So it's just this like terrible cycle of I continue to eat and eat, but it takes a lot more for me to feel full. And so that's where I was like, I'm to the point where I don't feel that any of my efforts are really going to be sustainable, because I'm always going to go through this. Okay, yeah, I lost 40 pounds, but then I gained back 60 sort of thing. And I was like, I can't do this. So I looked into it, and I had to go through like these like 6 months of nutrition classes, because they're like, hey, this isn't like a quick fix. You can't just go get a surgery and like you're good to go. Like you have to make the life changes for it to work. Because a lot of people will go and get this surgery and they'll be good for like a year, and then they revert back to their old habits, and then they're screwed, right? And I was like, if I'm going to go through all this trouble, I'm going to make it worth it, right? And so in 2020, during COVID and stuff, is like when I started going to the classes and trying to like seek out like, okay, I really want to make this happen. And then I lost some weight during it and stuff, but then I also like yo-yoed back up. So it was like, I was already fighting with myself at the time. So I got down to like I got up to like 440, got back down to like 410. And then during the last like 2 months before my surgery, which was in March of 2021, so 3 years ago this month, I yo-yoed back up to my highest weight ever, which was 454 pounds on the scale, like the week before my surgery, or maybe 10 days before my surgery. And I probably was higher than that at some point. It was probably like 460, but that was the last time that I actually had like a recorded weight that was that high. And so I went and did my surgery in 2021. Super, not great recovery. You have to like be on a liquid diet only for a few weeks. And like your stomach is so small and so inflamed that like you can't even take more than an ounce of water at a time. And like water is like your lifeblood during this. So you have to like really manage your water intake and manage your protein intake. So I'm like drinking bone broth with like protein powder in it just to try to get my body enough nutrients to do what it has to do. And so fast forward to the next 3 years over time, I worked on myself a lot, not just from a physical aspect, but also mental. So I started like working out. I really like adhered to trying to eat better. And like, even to this day, like I still eat probably not great. Like, okay, it's not probably not great. I don't eat great, but I eat so much better than I once did. And what's great about the surgery is that it provides you that buffer to where if you do something, your body has an immediate response to, you can't do this, because it either like hurts or like you don't feel good or like you throw up because you ate too much. Like it provides that level of like, hey, if you haven't learned yet, I'm going to teach you a lesson right now. Right. Because I've had times where like, I'm like, man, I just really want to eat some more, and I eat more. And then I'm like, man, I just threw up because I feel like shit. Right. So it provided me that immediate feedback to like relearn my habits. And then it allowed me to make sustainable change over an extended period of time. So now,
can you go more into, because nutrition, anybody can like go learn about that.
Right.
It's more of the mentality and what you had to work on to sustain, to make it through. Because I think that's a way more important story for me, at least, than the nutrition, right? There's anybody can learn about nutrition online, but nobody shares the mental struggle that is, I love food. It's my source of comfort. It is my warm blanket. Like I would compare, again, I didn't have a very good relationship with my mother, but
Yeah.
I always wanted that feeling of feeling safe.
Yeah.
And I never had that. I never felt that with my mom.
Yep.
But I felt that with food.
Yeah.
So to me, it was like you're taking how I feel about it, right? In how I do it. That's the thing that makes me feel great. Like I'm okay. It's life is hard. This is okay. And I'm like, you're trying to take that from me. It's how do I do it now? Now is where the work begins.
Right. So yeah, you're essentially like have a vice and you have to figure out like how do you break free from the vice without trading it for another one. And that's where a lot of people fall prey is like someone will quit smoking, but then they'll like start drinking or like they, get into other addictions, whether it's substances or whatever. So I didn't really like trade one addiction for another, but it was like understanding that as much comfort that I found in food, I also had to realize that it wasn't the source of it, because ultimately I was the source of how I got there, but it was such a big part of what got me to the worst place in my life, and remembering that this isn't a place that I never want to be again. I never want to see this number on the scale again. I never want to feel this way again, both physically and mentally. And with that, I want to expand upon what actually led me to the decision to go through with the surgery. Because there's a lot of people on the internet and stuff that are like, oh, you got the surgery, like you took the easy way out. That's cool. Like you can think whatever you want, but like if you don't understand, again, you have not walked a day in my shoes, right? If you don't understand what sort of discipline it takes to go through that process and like willingly put your body in that position to go through a surgery and then to actually walk the walk afterwards and go through all the life changes required, there's so much work that goes into it. All it does is it provides me a tool that I can use to get there and create sustainable change for myself. Like if you want to call it a shortcut, that's cool, but I'm still alive today because of that surgery. I'm living the life that I'm living today because that surgery served as a catalyst for me to springboard me forward and give me a means to succeed, I guess. I always had the means, but it gave me a better likelihood to succeed. Whereas before
Can I challenge you on that?
Yeah, of course.
What if you considered it this way? You are you. You're not me. You're not anybody else. You follow?
Yeah.
So what works for me may not work for you.
True.
That's okay. But for me to tell you that what you did is not right, well, we're back to the beginning, what I just said. We're looking for validation.
Yeah.
So what if you just look at it as like, that's what you needed? You needed to prove to yourself that you're willing to stick it through. And the surgery was that mechanism.
Yeah.
But some of them is diet. Some of them is gym. Some other people are whatever that is, right?
Right.
But yours was this. This was your trial.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you needed to prove to yourself, and you had made the decision. This was the thing that you were going to prove that to yourself with.
Right.
So if you think of it that way, I think it changes the narrative.
I think that's still how I've always felt. When I was saying that other people may not see it that way, is more just there is a lot of like noise, as we say again, that's floating around about everybody just really needs to mind their own damn business and stop worrying about what other people are doing. Like it's great if you can look at someone else's situation and find motivation or something through that. But if you're just going to look at someone else's circumstances and like nitpick at it with like no basis behind it, like what's the point? Like if you're doing it from a place of like, hey, I want this person to see that this could be hurting them, that's different. But if you're looking at someone bettering themselves but having to do it through a means of surgery to create a sustainable change, and you're going to nitpick that person for trying to make the decision to save their own life, like what for? What is it for, right? So I don't really like take any stock in it. I was just more saying that because that narrative does exist for some people. I just don't personally care if people feel like that, because anyone that looks at the way I lived before and the way I live now, and they see what I did as oh, you cheated, like, cool, dude. Like, you obviously don't have my best interest in mind. Like, I just don't care.
But how is that to challenge that thought, right? Let's try to consider that person.
Okay.
When I hear that from people,
Mm-hmm.
what comes to my mind is a projection.
Oh, for sure.
It's not real. It's not an objective point of view. It's simply a projection of their own internal dialogue.
I agree with that too. Because
Yeah.
I used to be that same person. I was highly critical of other people when I was hurting too.
I mean, guilty too.
Yeah.
I'm no less judgmental. I'm
Right.
just more aware of my judgment. I'm more aware of my criticality.
Yeah.
But it's something that nobody can stop.
Right.
You just have to understand that. Back to the voice. Like, the voice is going to be there. You have to understand that voice and what purpose it serves.
Yeah.
And none of us have a clean internal dialogue.
True.
It's this other thing that we live with. You have to understand, I make a choice to be who I am.
Yep.
Not I listen to the voice and then I do what it says. You can't. Those are the people that don't truly want to live their life for who they are in an introspective way,
Right.
because they're doing no reflection
True.
of that voice. So that's why I say this with you is and for anybody listening, when you hear that, your first thought has to be, it's simply a projection from how they are inside. It's not a reflection of you.
Right.
Big difference. Reflection would be, this is something that I see in them that's in myself.
Yeah.
That's acknowledgement of yourself. A projection is, that's not something that belongs in you. It's something that they're telling you.
That's true. Yeah.
Is that a fair way to state it?
No, I agree. I agree with that. It's like often people who are hurting say hurtful things to others, or what, like that's just an example, but that's kind of like the big picture I think that you're trying to allude to.
Agreed.
Okay. So so what led to the point of making the decision though? So earlier I said it a little bit of like the thought of making the change and going through with it seemed less daunting and less scary than the thought of continuing to live how I was living. Like, you know, my life was coming together as far as like my relationship was great at the time. Like finances were starting to be a lot better, but I still like didn't have my health in order, both physically and mentally. Like I was not at all in the mental state that I had been previously. Like that, I would say like the depression, if you will, had more or less ended, but I still had some depressive tendencies because I didn't like who I saw in the mirror, right?
Well, just to clarify, the idea is you weren't trying to reach a destination. It was
Correct.
simply your journey. You
Yeah.
just happen to be further along in the journey.
Correct.
But there is going to be no destination for mental health. You don't
True.
arrive somewhere and you're like, I did it.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's very true. I like that perspective too, because yeah, it's like that you will even like today, like with who I am happy with that I am today, I'm still not like 100% like, God, I just love everything about myself. Like not at all. Like I'm still super hard on myself. I see myself in the mirror and I'm like, you look awful. And I think I have like, I don't know if you're familiar with body dysmorphia.
Looks like that might change after this podcast and you'll do some reflection of that
Yeah,
voice.
yeah. So there's something called body dysmorphia where like people may see themselves in a different manner physically than what they really are. And I was like looking at myself in the mirror the other day and I'm like, man, you look huge, but not realizing like just for everyone that's on the podcast, like I've lost 190 pounds. I've lost like more than some other people. And I look at myself as if I was still as big as I used to be. Yeah.
And you're not like, wow, that's amazing.
Some days I am because I feel like my face looks really different. But then when I look at my body, I'm like, you look awful. But it's really just because I'm so still highly critical of myself. And this is why the reason I'm talking about this is because and it goes along with what you were just saying. There's always a continuous improvement place, right? That like we need to continue to strive to be nicer to ourselves or give ourselves more grace or whatever. So like you said, there is no end destination. I don't think that I'll probably ever be fully content with who I am, but if I can be content with putting my best effort forward to be the best version of myself today and trying to continue to do more with my life each and every day and make it worth it for that dude who was sitting there on his couch that day with a shotgun and sitting there and looking back and being like, hey, look what I'm doing today. Look how far we've come and look how far you can continue to go. And this is why I said earlier, like, I feel like everyone has the ability to tap into this level of greatness within themselves as long as they break free of this societal norm of like, this is this cookie cutter life that you need to live. But in doing that, and there's nothing wrong with that because it's safe, but you will never be able, in my opinion, you will never be able to achieve the level of greatness and success with yourself if you're not willing to step out of your comfort zone and see what could have been. Like if I had just been like, okay, I got this job, I'm good to go. Like I'm not going to do anything else. Like I'm content. That's cool. Like I could probably live a happy life. But for me personally, I feel like we're truly in control of our destiny more or less. And I feel like a lot of those really difficult trials that I went through earlier and like the losing my jobs and the random things that happened was like life's way of redirecting me to a path that I needed to fulfill to allow me the opportunity to fulfill the destiny to be the best version of Danny. And that's truly what I believe in. And some people probably think that that's crazy, and that's totally fine. But that's how I rationalize the path that I'm on now and why I'm so focused on doing more.
But none of those people are here right now,
Correct.
Danny. There's only you.
I know, but I keep going. Yeah, you're right. I keep going back to this. I know everybody thinks this, and you're absolutely right. And it's so mind blowing to now, as we're just having this discussion, because I now have somebody that keeps putting it back in my forefront of vision. But you're right. Like I need to stop worrying about what everybody else fucking thinks and just live my most authentic self and just
and
be
you're
happy
doing
with
it.
it. I am doing it.
And let
yeah.
me acknowledge you again, because this is what it looks like for anybody listening. You could be 100% self-critical. You could say anything you want about Danny or myself right now, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But you're not recording this and putting it out to the world.
True.
You are not having to face the same level of vulnerability. And if you want to, perfect. Go do that. You don't have to be on a podcast.
Yeah.
Go to your partner, go to your parents, go to your friend, go to the person that you have that difficulty with and open up. Just do it and realize that whatever comes up for you, that's what everybody has to do every single time when you want to be vulnerable, is that vulnerability is the ability to be authentic with where you are. And if where I'm at, you don't like Danny, that's okay. Thank God it's not you.
Yeah.
It's me.
That's true, right?
So if I share, Danny, I'm sharing about me. And if you want to project Danny into your life, I get it, my man. That's why you don't live my life.
Yeah.
I live my life. And that's where I think the power comes from. It's knowing that you live your life for you.
Yeah.
Not for anyone else, not for your partner, not for your wife, not for your husband, not for your kids.
Right.
Like you live your life.
Correct.
And that is what I believe is the light in the darkness that attracts people.
Yeah.
That's what attracted me.
I agree.
I'm like, what an awesome. I mean, literally, I met you. We talked for a couple minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then my partner told me about you. And I was like, what a phenomenal story.
Yeah, like so me and Steven have literally talked for maybe 3 minutes, like in person before this entire podcast. Like we met in passing a few different times. And then, yeah, his partner told him about like my story and stuff a little bit. And then he was like, yeah, let's talk. But yeah, I'm like being super vulnerable to this guy that I barely know, but I do feel comfortable talking about it, which is really cool. So like, I appreciate the conversation. And this is, I'm happy to be a part of this because I know what seeing other people and their stories in the past via Instagram or whatever, like their weight loss journey or their mental health journey or whatever, seeing those people and knowing that this person can do it, I am just equally as capable. There's nothing different about this individual than myself other than the discipline and the belief in oneself to do something more, right?
And that's what this podcast is all about.
Yeah.
It's just to highlight everybody's journey,
Right.
because the name is what gives it. Life with perspective.
True.
If I live my life with perspective, I don't create tribes. I don't create echo chambers. I say, let me talk to the Dannys of the world because I'm going to learn something from them. There's Danny. Danny knows some stuff. He's gone through some shit. Oh my God, I'm Danny.
Yep.
And this is what I think we fail at today, is to learn the thing that makes us so similar because we're so wrapped up in why we're different.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Like I'm actually glad you're talking about this, is because it's so easy for society to be so divisive because someone thinks differently than me. But people lose sight of the fact that a lot of our beliefs stem from how we were raised and the conditions that we've lived in have led us to the beliefs that we hold today. Someone who is in this circumstance, in a different circumstance than me, may have a different belief system due to events and things that have happened in their life. It doesn't mean that they're wrong, but their beliefs are based on their reality. And same with mine. And it doesn't mean that we're wrong. We just need to be open to listening to one another. And even if I may not agree with you, if I can understand how you came to the conclusion or how you came to that belief, if I can understand what led you there, then great. But again, it's your reality. It's your belief. You don't have to live my life. I don't have to live yours. But society today is so divisive, and the fact that we can't have conversations with someone anymore that has a different perspective is really sad. And I hope that it gets better. And I hope that there are more rational individuals that can go and facilitate these conversations, even when they're from completely different perspectives. But until people are willing to sit at the same table and have those discussions rather than just seeing each other as an enemy, then we're always going to be in this place.
And that's my hope for this podcast, right? It's been a lot of turmoil for me internally to overcome to do this. Yeah. Just self-doubt, all the stuff that you are well aware of. Just, it's hard to think that you could do something that's impactful. And this is not for me to make an impact on anybody but myself. And the impact is to be able to listen to these conversations and create a safe space for everybody else to go hear them.
Yeah.
They're not in this room. They don't have to feel uncomfortable. You could turn it off. You don't have to listen to this. You think this is shit? Perfect. Don't listen.
Yeah.
It's so simple. But there might be a moment to the Dannys of the world, to the Steves of the world, where this podcast will reach them at the right time.
Yep.
And that your story will understand. They'll hear it, and they'll say, I'm Danny.
Yeah.
Because they'll relate to you in every possible way of how you just told your story.
Yeah.
And that alone, for a person that came up in like a very dark person, right? Very pessimistic.
Same.
Yeah, right? So that's what I'm saying. I am Danny.
Yeah.
It is so hard to find the light when you're in the darkness for yourself.
Yep.
And you're waiting for somebody to come snatch you out of it. It will never happen.
Yep.
But if I cannot feel alone in the darkness, that's the hope that you just gave somebody
for
today.
Sure.
And not because this was your intent. You came to share openly and vulnerably, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
But it's about how will somebody else take these words of yours and truly listen.
Right.
And then take from that some of the learning that you did to apply it to their own life.
Yep.
If you have a shitty voice inside, change it. Start there. It costs you nothing.
Yep. And it's super worth it. Like, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and it's not, like we said earlier, it's not a quick fix, but it is so worth it to see what's on the other side of that door, right? And you just got to put in the work and keep pushing back and keep believing that you're worthy of more, that you're worthy of being happy, and that there's nothing that sets you apart from any other human that's living the life that you want to live, other than your belief in yourself and the work that you put in to get there. Like, granted, there's certain scenarios where there's a little bit of luck involved. I'm not going to say that doesn't exist, but for someone that truly believes in themselves and has a level of persistence to continue to walk that path, and even if you veer off the path, if you continue walking forward and you come back to the path, you're still walking in a forward direction that's closer to your destination. And when we say destination, we're not saying like your end goal of mental being, but whatever, when we talk about destination, your goals, right? And you may continue to have more goals after you reach the next destination. That's totally fine. But if you continue to walk in the direction that is in the pursuit of the life that you want to live, the goals that you want to achieve, the person that you want to become, continue to walk. It doesn't matter if you're driving down the highway going 80 miles an hour or if you're walking pedestrian on the side of the highway. Keep fucking walking, because eventually, as long as you continue to walk that path, you will reach that destination. But as long as you tell yourself that you can't do it, you will always be right.
I think that's where we end it. This is fucking beautiful. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming through. I appreciate you sharing. And when this goes up, I hope you could really be proud of yourself.
Yeah, man. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.
You too.